You know, I've played a lot of Resident Evil games in my day. Hell, I'd say almost all of them at this point, but for whatever reason, I've yet to give one of the more interesting entries in the series a try. Well, that ends today. I'm finally going to find out exactly how well survival horror works on a portable platform. That is, if it even works at all. What's up, guys? I'm Jared from Avalanche Reviews. Welcome to the Resident Evil Retrospective. Resident Evil Gaiden has a pretty interesting history to it. It started out as an attempt at porting PS1's Dino Crisis to the Game Boy Color, but after Capcom's recent experience with a similar port of the first Resident Evil, it was decided a unique game more fitting to the restraints of Nintendo's handheld was in order. And to ensure a favorable outcome, Capcom supplied Shinji Mikami and Hiroki Kato to the British development team, which you would assume gave them an air of legitimacy, but, well, we'll get into that later. Much like the development of RE2, the devs thought their work wasn't exactly up to snuff and petitioned Capcom to let them switch over to the soon-to-be-released Game Boy Advance. Of course, Capcom, being the god-tier businessmen they've always been, denied the move, at least at first. They did revisit the idea, but long after the point where it would have been viable, so both companies were now stuck with a Game Boy Color game well into the life of the extremely popular Game Boy Advance. Oh well, no use dwelling in the past, right? Besides, this game had honest-to-goodness RE vets working on it. That's gotta count for something, right? Like I said, Capcom loaned out the services of series creator Shinji Mikami and Code Veronica director Hiroki Kato to help create a tale that would fit in with the other games in the series. A move that literally did nothing to keep this story from amounting to a pile of hot garbage. Which makes sense, I guess. I mean, Code Veronica's story wasn't exactly great, and the only good things Mikami ever did was directing the first game, and then having good enough sense to bow out when more qualified devs took the reins. And speaking of the first game, Gaiden has you taking the role of Barry Burton of Stars fame, who after the events of parts 1 and 2 joins an underground organization with the goal of wiping out the Umbrella Corporation. After another series vet, Leon Kennedy disappears while investigating rumors of a new BOW being on board the Starlight Ocean liner, Barry is sent to straighten things out. Once on board, Barry finds Leon, a lone survivor, and of course, a ship filled to the brim with zombies. The new BOW Barry's been looking for turns out to be a much more complicated affair than previously thought, which results in a double cross or two. All of which leads to an incredibly non-canon ending that'll probably piss off any fans of RE2. Not long after the game's release, its story was pronounced as a what-if type of side story with no actual relation to the series' timeline, which it would have to be. Without giving anything away, rest assured, this game would have caused a time paradox. And on top of that, well, it's just bad. It's a cheesy story told through poor writing and an obvious lack of knowledge regarding the characters. It reads like a Saturday morning cartoon, and even in a series known for bad dialogue, Gaiden deserves special mention. On the plus side, it's kind of quaint in a baby acting like it's talking on a cell phone kind of way, and it'll take you less than an hour and a half to get through, but that's the extent of the compliments I have. If the idea of a one-off alternate universe side story sounds appealing to you, like it did to me, just know that Gaiden will definitely disappoint you. And that brings us to the most interesting part, the gameplay. It was obvious from the get-go no one was going to be able to port an exact copy of the survival horror experience to the 8-bit Game Boy Color, but I'll be damned if M4 didn't come about as close as humanly possible. The Starlight is a huge ship, and like any self-respecting RE setting, requires equal amounts of exploring, item collection, and backtracking to conquer. Instead of giving items that classic shimmer, Gaiden uses an alert system that lets you know when you're near something that's examinable. Key items, ammo, and healing herbs are scattered all over the place, and players with a knack for wandering off the beaten path will find this game has a fair amount of secrets. Now, I would forgive you if you got flashbacks of classic Resident Evil during that explanation, because it does feel very authentic, and I have to give credit where credit's due. These guys understood RE enough to mimic most of its surface-level elements. The concepts of ammo conservation, limited healing items, and running from fights more often than not are all here, and they technically work, but it's when they're experienced together that things start to fall apart. For example, the game incentivizes avoiding combat, but there are several cases where keys needed for progression are dropped by enemies. so a successful run through Gaiden requires either several playthroughs under your belt or having a strategy guide handy. Before I beat the game, I had to restart about 3 times, and mostly this was due to not having enough ammo or me missing an endgame mega weapon like the rocket launcher. So by the time I actually beat it, I had most of the game memorized, but around this time the cracks in Gaiden's design were clear as day. It's clear that these guys were doing their best, but gameplay-wise, this felt like a first attempt. Kind of like the devs had never made a game like this, and after doing a bit of research on their other products, this seems to definitely be the case. But hey, enough with the negatives, let's talk about something N4 got right: Gaiden's combat. Clearly, Resident Evil's standard approach wasn't going to work here, so a more RPG-like system was used. Zombies roam around in set locations, and you're given 2 ways to initiate combat. Just like classic RE, coming into direct contact with a zombie means having to mash buttons to push them away, but you can also draw your weapon and move a reticle over them. Doing this allows you to control how far away enemies are when first-person combat initiates. Once in a fight, there are a few things to take into account. First is distance. Zombies can either be far, medium range, or right up on you, and this affects how easy they're going to be to beat. The second thing you'll probably notice is the unique way the game handles attacking. Just above your ammo and health stats, there's an indicator moving side to side. Each enemy has an attackable area underneath them, and if you can attack when the 2 line up, well, you've got yourself a hit. Like you would imagine, the closer they are, the easier they're going to be to hit, but when zombies are right up on you, they can attack too. This combat system was weird at first, but after I got used to it, I found it to be pretty damn genius. The more powerful weapons in the game offset their usefulness by increasing the speed of the moving indicator, and some fights require you to keep hitting a smaller target to keep enemies away from you. Before we move on, I do have one criticism that's more my fault than the game's. Thanks to my use of the XRGB Mini for upscaling and my terribly old Sony LCD, I encountered much more lag than most people probably will. This more than likely won't be an issue for most of you since the FrameMeister's frame buffer can be counterbalanced with a TV with a decent response time, but it was definitely noticeable on my end and made the last boss fight a major pain. Despite the shortcomings of my setup, it's clear that most of the effort went into making this combat work, as it shows more polish than the game it's included in. But while we're being nice, let's throw a few more compliments in there. One thing I really liked is how you're sometimes able to sequence break the game. Heading off the planned route will often net you keys that open up parts of the ship you're not supposed to be in yet. Exploring these areas before the devs thought you'd be there results in a complete lack of enemies. This means you can obtain keys and items not only before you're supposed to have them, but without the danger of running into zombies. I think this was an unintended consequence of trying to mimic RE's linear but semi-open-ended gameplay, and makes for some fun after you've gotten real familiar with the order of the game's events. Altogether, I'd say this is a technically bad experience, but it comes so close to feeling like a real Resident Evil game that it's almost worth the price of entry. For every time the game comes up short, there's a solid idea underneath it. Little things like the unique combat, authentic feeling exploration, and limited saves came together to make what could have been a real Resident Evil game, but I don't know if the devs knew how to tie these concepts together as a whole, so we're left with a game that's just as impressive as it is, well, bad. RE Gaiden is damn graphically impressive for an 8-bit mobile production. The look of the environment was fairly atmospheric, and each zombie visually represented how they looked in combat. Speaking of the zombies, these guys are pretty damn gruesome, which left me wondering if Nintendo's rules for publishing to their platforms were still in place at this point. Everywhere you look, there's a blood splatter or gory intestines hanging out, and the pixel art used here gets the point across about as well as you could expect. The backdrops for the combat sequences change depending on the area you're in, and have some pretty nice animations going on too. Items in your inventory range from pretty good looking to kind of crap, which brings us to the rest of the art in the game. Faces used in the inventory screen and cutscenes are not only god-awful, but inconsistently god-awful. Even though Barry and Lucia's faces are pretty bad looking, at least they're visually similar. It's clear that Leon's face is a trace of CG art from RE2, and this style clashes really hard. The pixel art used in cutscenes can be pretty terrible too, but sometimes the game trips face first into some really good looking artwork. How can I describe this properly? Well, let's just say the ancient practice of god-awful 80s era British video game art is alive and well in Gaiden. I did have some issues with slowdown when there were a lot of sprites on screen, but it seemed like this got worse as I kept playing the game. Since this is a repro cart, I'm not sure if this is present in the official release, but it's something to look out for. In the audio department, there's some pretty interesting stuff going on too. First off is the use of some great sounding digitized voices. The zombie moans are great sounding for a GBC game, but the at the title screen is almost impossible to understand. The music in the game is actually pretty creepy sounding and emulates the series standard damn well. The one issue I have is the lack of music and the length of what's here. Each song sort of acts like a baseline tune, increasing in complexity based on enemies on screen and whether or not they've detected you. But these songs are really short, so you end up getting tired of them real quick. Well, I gotta say, despite the uniqueness and huge amounts of novelty, I don't think I can recommend Gaiden to the average RE fan. It's fine as a fun little curiosity, but lacks the feeling of a complete experience. The story does some pretty ridiculous things with established characters, but even that is undone by Capcom wiping it from the timeline. Overall, I suggest all but the most curious collectors stay away, unless you enjoy really cool ideas surrounded by amateur game design. And speaking of amateurs, I gotta get back to working on the next video in the series. What video is that, you ask? Well, let's just say we're paying another visit to RE's first-person offshoots, but until then, I'll see you guys next time right here on the Resident Evil Retrospective. Hey guys, thanks for coming by. Make sure to click that subscribe button if you want to stay current with all this Resident Evil content, and stop by my Patreon page if you want to support a wildly attractive guy and his obsession with a few PS1 era horror games.